Hello and welcome back. I'm sorry for taking so long to upload another video. I got very busy with stuff like my graduation and other general life things, but I finally settled on an idea for my next video. Recently, after much recommendation from several online friends, I started a letterboxd account and decided to speedrun rating a bunch of movies that I've watched in the past year or so. I ended up rating a total of 230 films over the course of like a week, and I decided it'd be fun to go over all of my mini reviews for them while also ranking them from worst to best. Now obviously I can't do 230 movies in a single video. I don't hate myself nearly enough for that, at least not yet. So we're going to be splitting this up into 4 videos, with the first 58 ratings being in this video and the next 58 or so being in the next video, and then we'll keep going until we finally reach number 1. So unfortunately that does mean that this is going to be all of the movies at the bottom of my list, mostly 0 to 2 star movies. But without further delay, let's start the ranking at number 230, my current least favorite film I reviewed on Letterboxd.
Show me your worst. Well played, Mum and Dad.
I irrationally hate this movie. It is just the right amount of bad to be as horrible as it possibly can, without ever crossing over into so bad it's good territory. The kid is the most unlikable lead in the whole series, the comedy is painfully unfunny, the movie looks like shit, even the traps aren't really fun to watch. There's not a single thing I could genuinely say that I liked in this movie, so obviously it's going to the bottom of my list.
No sense of humor? Can't you take a joke?
The worst Friday the 13th movie in my opinion. Thankfully after this, the movies finally start to get semi-consistently good, but man, you can really tell they did not know what to do with the series during the brief period where Jason was dead. It's no wonder they brought him back in the very next movie. They try to go back to having a twist killer, but it's super damn obvious, and also they just put him in a Jason suit anyway. The characters are pretty annoying, and that ending, much like the previous film, is pretty shitty. The best parts of the movie are the ones that are probably already uploaded to a porn website somewhere without having to watch the entire rest of the movie.
E il mio lavoro non fa niente. Arrivederci.
This one is pretty infamously bad, and I was hoping it would at least be so bad it's good, but unfortunately I really just did not enjoy my time with this movie at all. Really glad the original run of Superman movies ended here, because they were really just completely out of ideas by this point, it seems.
Well, that makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress, sticking a hot dog through a donut.
The only part of this movie that made me feel anything was Freddy's glove at the end. Other than that, this feels like a complete lie of a movie. Not only do we never see Jason in hell, we barely see Jason at all aside from the opening and the very end. And then they also do the same thing they did to Freddy Krueger, where they try to give him this big supernatural backstory, which isn't surprising since this is the first Jason movie done by the same team as the Nightmare movies, and served pretty much only to set up for Freddy vs. Jason. Overall, I'd recommend skipping this one and going straight to Jason X.
You're crazy. You know that? I knew you were crazy the minute I laid eyes on you. Crazy.
It's almost impressive how bad this movie is. It's all of my least favorite things about the Saw franchise at their worst. We have the traps that rely on others to save you, characters who did literally nothing to deserve the traps, an over-reliance on the torture porn, and yet another reveal of people who were in on the Jigsaw scheme all along. The only saving grace of this movie is that it has a really good concept of a man lying about being in a jigsaw trap, and then being put in an actual jigsaw trap, but the execution is pretty damn awful.
Shall we?
I mean, I guess it's not aggressively bad, but this movie does not have an original bone in its body. The entire story feels like they threw the scripts of the first 4 movies into a blender, and then assembled a new one from the remaining shreds of paper. Pretty much every single thing you see in this movie is just taken from one of the previous ones.
Mr. Prescott!
Literally, the most important rule of a Home Alone movie? Having the kid home alone just isn't followed here. It's the name of the series, yet he has the butler guy and the maid lady in the house with him the entire time. Much like a lot of the sequels, this movie completely misses the point of the series, but I'd argue it does it worse than any of the other sequels.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
This is the only time I completely got the hate for the sequels. The saving grace of this movie is some great looking visuals, but you can tell they really just wanted this trilogy to be over so they could move on from all the hate. It is pretty much all the worst parts of the Star Wars franchise in a single movie. I definitely understand why some people hate this one so much. Kinda goes completely against everything I personally liked in the first three movies, and it heavily relies on nostalgia for the first one, which really helps it to not stand out considering that all of the first three had a completely new companion character and a completely separate adventure.
Get that bitch!
Really, really bad movie. I only gave it 1 star because
You sit the fuck down and shut up.
had me laughing my ass off, but yeah, this is the low point of the franchise. Weirdly enough, it feels more like a mid-80s Friday the 13th movie than a Texas Chainsaw movie. It's way more sleazy than the other ones and the acting is pretty bad, and the story feels like something I'd come up with if you gave me 10 minutes and some edibles. Pretty weak attempt to revive the franchise. The cop plot is one of the weaker ones in my opinion, and the traps are all pretty bad. The only one I liked was the first one with the buckets, but all the rest of them either don't feel enough like Saw traps or feel way too over the top. The twist is also one of the worst in the franchise, and you can definitely see why this wasn't the grand revival they were hoping it would be. Weirdly enough, all the stuff surrounding Superman is my least favorite part of this movie. Like, all the stuff with him and the one-off love interest are pretty weak, but I actually kind of like all the cyborg stuff and think it's kind of fun. It's not movie-saving, which is why this is still in the 1-star category, but I could definitely see the movie being way better if they just had Superman versus these robot people the whole time.
Son of a bitch.
Honestly, yeah, this is a pretty bad movie, but I don't know why people treat this like some outlier in this series. Let's not act like any of the previous movies were perfect. By this series standards, this is just slightly below the average. I also feel like most people are kind of hurt that they didn't spend longer in Manhattan, which is probably the movie's biggest flaw. But honestly, I'm just glad we finally got a new location at all. I was getting tired of seeing Jason chase people in the woods. This is probably a hot take, but this is by far my least favorite of the Pirates movies. It's the only film that feels like it almost completely abandons the fun of the first one. The second movie was already moving to be darker, but this one literally opens with a kid being hanged at the gallows, which is a step way too dark for this series in my opinion. This movie still has some solid action, but the inconsistent character motivations in this one get really annoying, and a lot of the campy fun is just straight up gone now. I guess if you're a mega fan of the series, I'd recommend it, but out of all the sequels, it feels the most far removed from what made the first movie so good.
Question? Yeah! What are you on?
The last mainline Nightmare on Elm Street film, and unfortunately it is by far the worst. It's no wonder the next two solo Freddy films decided to pretty much start from scratch because the lore by this point is a mess. I don't think anyone really cared at all about how Freddy became a dream demon. It's one of those things everyone just accepts, but for some reason they dedicate this entire movie to giving a backstory, even though the last three films already kinda did that. And at least the last movie bothered trying to explain how he came back after being killed, but in this one they don't even try. Freddy has also just become a full Looney Tunes character at this point. You could swap him out for Bugs Bunny and have the script honestly work better. As always, we do still get some pretty creative dream sequences, but this entire movie is just stupid, and you can tell he really gave up on making this series scary. A pretty unneeded prequel. I don't know why we couldn't just have a direct sequel to the reboot. I don't think anyone was dying to find out how these guys became a cannibal family. And weirdly enough, they barely even spend any time on them becoming the cannibal family. It quickly devolves into probably the most generic Texas Chainsaw film yet. Some of the deaths are still pretty cool, and there are a handful of tense scenes, but you will probably not get attached to anyone in this movie.
Promise dying people. Dying people!
This is probably a really controversial take because I know a lot of people love this movie, but a lot of the things I like in a Saw movie are just absent. All the stuff with John is great, but that only lasts so long before it has to start being an actual Saw movie. A lot of the traps just feel blatantly unfair in this, which is one of those types of traps I really hate, and the movie also ends on a pretty unresolved note. It also feels like backtracking and nostalgia baiting, having John, Amanda, and Hoffman all back. I do feel like Saw just needs a complete reboot at this point.
Master Windu.
I don't have much to say on this one. My least favorite of the prequel, sadly. Some of the fights are pretty good, and there's some decent action outside of that, but overall, I just never really cared for this one.
Ever come back again? Oh, shut up, Ralph. It's got a death curse.
This movie is extremely overrated. It's not a completely irredeemable movie, but holy crap, it has not aged well at all. I don't think anyone will remember this movie at all if the sequels didn't all have Jason. This movie is almost the opposite of all the best Friday the 13th movies. There's shockingly little gore, and even the extremely sleazy but dumb fun of the future sequels is mostly absent. The only two deaths I remember are Kevin Bacon's character and then Pamela's. The saving graces are the last 20 minutes or so when Pamela is finally on screen, and some of the creepy music throughout. I guess that crazy old guy is also entertaining, but he's barely in the movie. This movie is so slow, but not in the foreboding, atmospheric way that movies like the original Halloween were. It all feels like I'm watching a Paranormal Activity film with how much I'm just looking at nothing but the group doing random camping-related chores. They try to make it a murder mystery, but we don't ever meet Pamela before the reveal, and they mention Jason drowning like once. Overall, you're better off watching almost any of the sequels. From what I can tell, this is a hot take, but this is my least favorite Harry Potter movie. Now, I will admit I may be harder on this movie without meaning to be. The Prisoner of Azkaban book is my favorite book in the series, so I was always going to judge the film version a little more harshly. The other reason is that Columbus is now gone as director, and as someone who loves his directing style, that hit me pretty hard. But even trying to be as fair as possible, I still think this is my least favorite movie. This movie is often credited for making the other movies darker, and I think that's the biggest problem with it. I'll mention later how the Chamber of Secrets didn't kill anyone off because going that dark before Voldemort's return would have spoiled the complete shakeup he brings to this world. So having a movie that's pretty much all the dark moments of Prisoner of Azkaban with most of the fun bits removed kinda spoils that moment in the films. This is a point where we're still supposed to have the whimsy and the blissful life before the darkness returns. I hate comparing movies to books, but there is a reason the book still had a Quidditch subplot or a bigger focus on the sillier elements like the psychic lady or Ron and Hermione's fights. Even stuff like Hermione appearing where she shouldn't be feels way more clunky in this one. I kinda feel like it ended up leading to the rest of the movies being worse in my eyes.
Number 7. Purple. My worst nightmare. Hippopotamus riding a bicycle.
This movie on its own is fine, which is why I'm not giving it a truly awful rating, but holy shit do I hate what this movie means for the franchise. This is the only Addams Family project I've seen where I felt like it was only made because someone was told to make it. The story is so basic and predictable, even if, like I said, it's mostly fine. Aside from Pugsley having an instant crush on who he believed was his sister at the time. But I'm so thankful the Wednesday show came right along after this to put the franchise back on track. The only mainline adaptation of The Grinch that I think completely fails. First off, it was just a plain bad idea to do this movie so soon after the live action. It hadn't even been 20 years, meanwhile the gap between the original and the live action was nearly 35 years. And because of that fact, this movie heavily relies on nostalgia for the live action, to the point where you'll occasionally have Benedict Cumberbatch doing a straight up impression of the live action Grinch voice. And while I will say this is a very nice looking movie that does have a lot of good Christmas visuals, even the art style is just the Despicable Me art style because Illumination refuses to ever stray from the same look that all their movies have had since 2014. And whereas the first two versions of The Grinch managed to stay pretty timeless outside of maybe some visuals, this movie dates itself pretty much immediately from the opening by having the main Grinch song be a rap number and having the narrator be a recognizable singer. There really is very little enjoyment enjoyment to be had here by anyone who hasn't already seen one of the previous versions. Even the Who's in this one miss the point. The whole point of the Who's is that they're supposed to be these somewhat pure lovers of the holiday who just enjoy their lives in each other's company. But in this one, most of them are portrayed as borderline cult members who worship Christmas trees like religious figures and Christmas carols like Bible verses. By the 20-minute mark, I'm fully on the Grinch's side. I wouldn't want to live down there with these freaks either. The only reason I give it 2 stars is because, like I said, the visuals do manage to capture that Christmas vibe, and occasionally you'll have a decently pulled off moment.
Martha, why did you say that name?
Stop! Please, stop!
Why did you say that name?
This movie is so stupid it almost wraps back around to being good. The main problem is a problem the early DCEU has in general, a lack of patience. Instead of setting up this version of Batman or Wonder Woman, who's in this movie for some goddamn reason, they rushed to do a crossover battle royale in the second film of this universe. The problems with this cinematic universe really did start early.
Anybody hungry?
Starving like Marvin.
Starving like Marvin.
My least favorite Halloween movie, sadly. I think it works well if you're a fan of the first Rob Zombie movie, but as someone who wasn't crazy about it, this one doesn't do much for me. I will say I like how they let Annie survive the first one only to die here, which definitely makes her death a lot more tragic. I also kind of like the ending a little bit, seeing Laurie go crazy after everything she went through in these 2 movies, but this is still a pretty weak entry in one of my favorite horror franchises. A pretty forgettable movie. I didn't remember a single thing about this before rewatching it recently. Crystal Skull is objectively the worst movie, but at least I remember parts of it. I really wish I could say I liked this movie more, considering it is the first one with hockey mask Jason. But it feels like a step back from part 2 in almost every way. The acting in the last 2 wasn't great, but I swear it's especially bad here. The characters are definitely more forgettable than the last movie, and maybe on par with the first movie. And they have this really annoying forced 3D gimmick that's more distracting than anything. The only reason this is half a star above the original is that it is admittedly really enjoyable to see Jason finally killing people with the hockey mask on. This is maybe the most direct-to-video sequel-ish movie. This is maybe the most direct-to-video sequel-feeling movie I've ever seen. Like, every part of this movie feels like it belongs in the bargain bin at Walmart. I still think it's a pretty charming time, but definitely a weak end to the Balto trilogy that I think drags down its overall quality. For some reason, when I was younger, they always played the first 2 movies and then this one. So maybe it's nostalgia, but I don't think this one is as bad as everyone says. It's still a weak movie, but I don't think it's the worst in the series, like most people say. It's got some nice family moments and some good laughs, which is more than I can say for most of the other sequels. Like I said, a weak movie, but not a horrible one.
Violins. Violins are bad. That screechy music's gonna ruin the goddamn country.
Sadly, after Bride of Chucky seemed to be moving the series in a new direction, this movie goes way too far in that new direction. This entire movie feels like something the writers of Scary Movie would come up with if you asked them to get high and pitch a Chucky movie. I will say that Glenn/Glenda is an interesting character aside from the random piss jokes, but the movie can't seem to ever fully decide on if he's the main character or not. There are a handful of jokes that made me giggle, but nothing that's ever fully enough to save this movie. This is one that I don't have much to say on. This is when the series goes full goofy. As always, there's some pretty creative visuals, and I'll say the story is almost decent, but overall this was not the best way to end the 80s era of nightmare films. But with this one out of the way, we can officially move into the top 200. I'll mention later how Predators felt like it was starting to make the series feel a little too much like a blockbustery Marvel movie, and I think this movie is even worse with that. The difference is this movie doesn't look nearly as good, the characters aren't as good, and the story is infamously awful. Shit, the Predators even give the humans what is basically Iron Man armor at the end. Really bad movie, but there are a couple decent set pieces and action scenes that make this at least somewhat of a fun time.
Ron, what are you doing? Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
If I had $1 for every time the Texas Chainsaw series made a direct sequel to the first one, only for that sequel to barely line up with the original at all, I'd have $2. Which isn't a lot, but I couldn't resist the Phineas and Ferb reference. This one feels kind of confusing on if it wants to be a more serious movie or if it wants to be campy. Like, this movie both includes a PTSD-ridden survivor of a school shooting and a person live-streaming Leatherface and threatening to cancel him. There are some decent sequences, but the movie is basically just a rehash of the 2018 Halloween movie.
Any problems at all, just my bird. Oh, it's gone.
Okay, so I have a theory about this movie. I think this movie was supposed to be the start of a Halloween Town TV series. We have an entire movie taking place in the human world with minimal monster effects and a whole new cast of side characters. Everything about this movie just feels like it's trying to lay the groundwork for a much longer set of stories with these characters. Why have the monster kids come to the human world and all get human disguises? That feels like setting up a secondary cast for a show and then also giving a reason to not have to put them in expensive makeup all the time. Why make Grandma a teacher at the school? Maybe that was them trying to give her a reason to interact with any school-related plots for the show. Why introduce the council and leave the gate to Halloween Town open? Well, now we have a cast of powerful characters to challenge our leads, and a place to visit during big event episodes. And that's honestly my big problem with the movie, is that it kind of feels like a lot of setup for something that we never ended up getting.
What the hell are you? I'm Batman.
I remember when I was younger, I could never get through the Nolan trilogy, and now I'm convinced this movie is why. It feels like it's trying a little too hard to be a big, gritty action movie. Scarecrow looks horrible, and they take the fear gas, which should be an easy excuse to get some really creative visuals, and turn it into mostly just shaky cam like a low-budget horror movie. There is still a lot to like about this movie, but it felt like it was almost embarrassed to be a superhero movie at times.
Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to exit the donut.
This is one of those movies I rarely remember much of until I rewatch it. It's a mostly filler movie in the grand scheme of the MCU too. The villain almost has a very cool weapon with the whips, but then they just stick him in an Iron Man suit at the end and kind of take away all of his uniqueness. Thankfully, some of that feel from the first Iron Man movie is still around here.
Come on, Cap.
This is when I think the MCU really started to go south for me. Mostly because this is when it started to feel like movies were getting made just to set up other movies and not because they actually wanted to make this a good movie on its own. Like, this movie was pretty much only made because they needed to 1. Introduce Vision, 2. Introduce Wanda and Quicksilver, and 3. Needed to get Hulk in space for Thor Ragnarok. The movie itself isn't like irredeemably awful, well, but you can tell it was pretty much only made to set up a bunch of other movies.
Which is murder! Release Dr. Red! Put down your weapons!
The low point of the Alien franchise, and it's not a competition. It starts off with the same problem that I'll talk about later on that Alien 3 had, where they pretty much just do a complete reset from the previous movie because for some reason this series keeps giving Ripley a definitive ending and then refusing to commit to it. And they also do this weird shit with that skeleton-looking thing. Half the scenes with Clone Ripley in this thing feel like someone's weird alien fanfiction. I still think the movie can occasionally be really entertainingly stupid, but this is the only Alien where it doesn't feel like the writers gave a shit about it.
Events today. The police were called to the scene shortly after 11 a.m. this morning after a seemingly harmless rambler.
I do agree that it's one of the weaker MCU movies, but I don't think it's super far below all the other movies. I think it takes itself a little too seriously most of the time, but for the most part it's just slightly below average. This is one of those movies I don't care for, but I don't think it's awful. It's mostly just the original movie updated for a new decade, although the editing is like a Saw movie for some reason. And then they take the series in a supernatural route by the end, which I'm also not too big a fan of. It's just a little too basic and by the numbers. I'd just recommend watching the first one.
Now. Well, better now. It's getting there. Why now? I can't see anything.
This is the weakest of the Santa Claus trilogy, in my opinion. I can't quite put my finger on why I like it the least out of all three, but sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just don't vibe with a movie, and in this case, that's what's happening with me. I like this movie, but I feel like it hasn't quite gotten a grasp on the Spy Kids type of humor. Like, the next two sequels feel really confident in their styles, and because of it, they're able to go really batshit insane. And while this film kinda tries to do that, I feel like it either doesn't go far enough, or the humor just feels kind of out of place and weird. Still not an awful movie, but I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it like I would with some of the other sequels.
Did use potion before? Fair warning. Tastes like goblin piss.
I have lots of experiences with that, dear Maddo.
There are some great scenes, but the big problem is the problem that most others have with this movie, the fact that it is mostly just set up. They also kind of screwed themselves by cutting out Harry getting the mirror shard in a previous movie, so now he kind of just has that big plot device with no explanation. Overall, not worth a watch on its own unless you're binging the entire series.
Get back on your bloomin' cockroaches!
I agree that this is definitely one of the weaker ones, but I think you'll at least enjoy your time with most of it if you let yourself. Jack and Barbossa is great as always, but I think the villain is what hurts it. Barbossa in the first one and Davy Jones in the second and third were highlights of all of those movies, but Blackbeard is the weakest of the four main Pirates villains. It's fun if you're a fan of the series, but definitely not a must-watch. I have like nothing to say on this one. As we get more towards the middle of the list, we kind of get into the movies that I think are just fine. I never really cared for this one. It's got some decent set pieces, but honestly nothing too special. I think this is a weak film, but not an awful one. While I'm definitely not a fan of this trilogy overall, I do think people overblow how bad it is. But yeah, it's a Star Wars movie, so pretty much everything I could have to say about it has been said like 1,000 times by people who are way better at writing reviews than I am.
What? Means I gave you an A in sound for nothing.
Some good kills, but a pretty silly reveal and character motivation. This feels like it was written as its own movie before someone realized how similar it was to the first one, so they forced in a couple connections. Not an awful film, but a pretty forgettable one.
Box.
Wow, that's one ugly son of a bitch.
I remember thinking this movie was nothing special, but I can definitely see why a lot of people like it. Only a couple of characters really grabbed me, and I do think the deaths are overall very well done, but it takes a pretty long time to get there. Not to say there aren't a bunch of creepy moments in the build-up to the massacre at the end, but not as many as I'd personally like. This isn't a horrible movie, but really forgettable to me. I've watched this movie like 5 times in the past few years, and I still struggle to remember anything that happens in it. Like I said, still not an awful movie though.
Hey, sketch! You break it, you buy it.
Grab the gem! Kill the heroes!
Is this movie bad? Definitely. Is this movie still occasionally fun enough that I don't hate it? Also definitely. Plus this movie gave us the
A bad credit card, you bastard!
so I have to give it at least an extra half a star for that. This is gonna sound weird considering how high up this movie is in the ranking, but I think this one takes most of what I liked about the first Captain America movie and gets rid of it. This feels like such a generic action movie for a lot of it, aside from some really good character work between Steve and the actual Winter Soldier. The action is all really good, but it does kind of feel like the stereotype of just a generic action movie. Again, I know this probably sounds weird considering how high up I have this one, but it was just a feeling I got.
You out of your f***ing mind? I could have killed you.
What are you talking about? I got the gun.
I could have killed you.
I almost really like this movie, but there are a lot of small things that add up to me not particularly caring for it. I'm pretty mixed on all the traps. They feel a lot like the ones from the last movie, where they either feel too over the top or not enough like Saw traps. Although I guess it makes a little more sense here since it isn't actually Jigsaw doing all of this. Some of them are also pretty creative too. The villain was super predictable. Like, I literally guessed him from the trailers. I definitely think this will be an enjoyable movie for most, but there's a lot of small things that add up for me to just not really care for it.
Are you in or are you out? It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind.
I really wish I liked this movie more, but I never really got into the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie all that much. All the actors are doing a really great job, and they really elevate a mostly by-the-books comic book movie. However, you can tell sometimes that Tobey hasn't quite gotten a hang of his role as Spider-Man yet. I do think the final fight and how Goblin dies is really good, but again, most of that is down to how much Willem Dafoe sells it. Like I said, I really wish I liked this movie more. Okay, you're gonna have to strap in for this one because this is a really long one, and it's also probably a really controversial one too. I am a massive fan of the Scream series. It is one of my favorite horror franchises of all time, but I could make an entire video on why I think Scream 2 is the worst of the franchise. It's not a god-awful movie, which is why it's still this high up, but even all these years later, it's still my least favorite in the series. You could argue that movies like Scream 3 or Scream 7 are worse movies objectively, but in terms of my personal enjoyment, this is the one that I like the least. While the mystery in the first movie wasn't groundbreaking, it was still a really well done mystery, but if you tell me you genuinely predicted who the killers of this movie were before the reveal, I'm either going to think you lied, or I'm going to ask you to tell me my fortune because you're clearly a psychic. This movie was apparently heavily rewritten after the original script leak, and it shows. Characters die off with little to no consequence, including Randy kind of just being forgotten about right after he gets killed. They introduce this pattern that the killers are following for their victims that gets pretty much completely forgotten about in the scene right after it's introduced. You'll have characters pop up literally just to die off and then have no importance on the plot. I will say, probably my favorite part about the movie is the opening, purely for how unique it is in this series, since it's the only one that doesn't rely on the phone calls. However, even this opener has some really big issues. Say what you want about some of the stuff in the other sequels not being too realistic, but these ghost faces must have genuinely been using some black magic to pull off some of the shit they do in this opening. Like, one of them just happens to know exactly when this guy needs to take a piss, and then knows exactly what stall he's going to use so that they can hide next to it, and just so happens to know the exact moment he puts his ear to the wall, and exactly where that ear is to stab him. Apparently Harry Potter let Miss Loomis borrow some of his liquid luck potion, because otherwise there's no way she predicted all that shit so perfectly. I could do an entire video on stuff like this about Scream 2 alone, and while again, it is far from the worst slasher movie I've ever seen, but it is definitely my least favorite movie in one of my all-time favorite horror franchises.
Maybe she was on something.
Drugs are peaceful, not violent.
This is another really long section, so strap in again. I feel really bad about not liking this movie more. I love how this trilogy starts and I adore how it ends, but the middle entry has been my least favorite since I first watched it. But until recently, I never realized how slow the first 40 minutes of this one are, because I recently showed it to a friend and had to sit there with him for the first 40 minutes of it while he continuously asked me when the actual slasher shit was going to start. Now let me make it clear, that second half of the movie has some of the best stuff in the entire series, but the first half is pretty much all set up with barely anything happening, and I don't mind a slower horror movie. I loved the original Halloween, but in that movie, it kept the creepiness up because Michael was a constantly looming threat in the background of the movie. He was always watching the main characters from around the corner, but in this movie, Tommy doesn't even get possessed until like the 45-minute mark. I would, even after all that, still almost say that this is an overall good movie, but then you have the basic setup being C. Berman telling Josh and Dina a story where only one scene in that story ends up actually being important to their mission. So you honestly could have condensed this entire movie down to just a flashback sequence in one of the other two and have the same result for the plot. I don't love this movie, but I still really, really love parts of it, which is why it's going all the way to the top of the 2 stars section.
Does she get this riled up in the sack, Tim? I bet she wears crotchless panties and barks like a dog.
This movie is a little hard to talk about because there are 2 very different versions of this movie that I think are pretty decently far apart in quality. There's a theatrical release, which I think is maybe the worst Halloween film ever made, with some good kills and creepy moments, but an absolutely god-awful story. Then there's the director's cut, which I actually think is pretty good with the directing and atmosphere, with a much better version of the story aside from the whole incest baby thing. But either way, I think it's clear why the next movie did a soft reboot. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to have Michael and his underage niece make the incest baby, or why they wanted to put him in the cult. Genuinely don't ever let that person write unsupervised again. Averaging how I feel about both versions, I guess I'd give it a 2.5. I know a lot of people think this is the worst Scream movie, and I almost agree, but there is just enough here that I do end up liking it more than Scream 2. The first 30 or so minutes are some of the best things out of any Scream movie. That brutal opening, the death in the theater, the scene with Ghostface stabbing at Sydney and her daughter through the walls. I was really prepared to end up loving this movie. But the movie pretty much takes a nosedive as soon as Gale Weathers steps out of that car. Once again, the Scream series proves it is completely out of ideas of what to do with Gale, and even Chad and Mindy feel pretty pointless in this one. This is also one of the most forgettable one-off casts in the franchise. Like, I don't remember anyone's name from the new cast members other than Sydney's daughter, and that's just because her name is taken from a character from Scream 1. The whole deepfake Stu thing is also pretty stupid, and some character decisions are ones I couldn't see anyone in the world making for any reason. Like the boyfriend making a deepfake video saying he's going to kill Sydney and then randomly leaving it open in his car. I will say I like the meta commentary. The recent trilogy of Scream films have moved away from commenting on the horror genre and commenting more on fandoms, and I like that it's a nice message that runs throughout all 3 of the most recent movies. Scream 5 was all about toxic fans who get too attached to a series, Scream 6 was about online hate campaigns and embracing legacy while moving forward, and then this movie comments on the fans who still, after all that, weren't able to move past the days of Sydney and want the series to stay stuck in the past. I'll also say this movie has some really great action. Like, this is a movie where people really put up a fight before they get killed off, and I think it's really fun to watch. Probably the most iconic Friday the 13th movie. Like, when people think of Friday the 13th or Jason Voorhees, this is probably the version they think of. This is a series where the quality is all over the place, and I actually do think that this is probably the most middle-of-the-road one. It's got some really good kills, but the formula is also just so played out by this point. The only characters I particularly care about this one are the main family, who unfortunately have to share screen time with another cast of forgettable teenagers. I also kinda hate the ending. They just do the, ooh, spooky kid doing a spooky face. So creepy. I will say this movie has probably the second strongest opening so far after the second movie's opening. This is when the series really starts going. This is when the Saw series really started going down the serialized route, and unfortunately I don't think this movie is the best start to it. I think all of the stuff with Amanda and John and the nurse is great, but this one has one of my least favorite trap plots in the series. To start off, this movie uses a lot of the types of traps I hate. The ones where a person is stuck in a trap and has to rely on someone else to get out. Jigsaw is supposed to be pushing people towards redemption, and it kinda goes against that when someone else is in charge of breaking you out. It's extra agitating here because the main character, Jeff, has absolutely zero sense of urgency. Like, half the traps look set up to only take about 30 seconds, and yet he always takes about 5 minutes to do the basic task required to save somebody. Okay, and that's the end of part 1 of ranking all the movies on my letterboxd. I'm recording this after editing the rest of this video, and weirdly enough, this video in particular seemed to have a lot of weird audio issues going on with it, but thankfully by the end of the video, whatever it was seemed to have fixed itself, so hopefully that won't be a problem going into part 2.